Roth versus traditional. The age-old question. If you're saving for retirement, this is probably the biggest decision you're going to make. And, it could literally be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. So today, we are going to settle it. We're going to use a massive data simulation to finally get a clear, data-driven answer. And I'm not exaggerating here. I mean, pretty much everyone with a 401k or an IRA has to wrestle with this. Do you pay the tax man now with a Roth, or do you kick that can down the road and pay him later with a traditional account? It's a universal financial puzzle we all have to solve. You've heard this a million times, right? It's the classic rule of thumb. It sounds so simple, so logical. And for a lot of people, this one little sentence is the foundation of their entire retirement strategy. But what if I told you that simple advice is, just too simple? What if it's actually so oversimplified that it's just plain wrong for most people? We're about to dig into how following this old wisdom could be one of the most expensive mistakes in your entire financial life.
Okay, let's get right into it. Let's break down the central flaw in that old school thinking. It really all boils down to knowing which tax rate actually matters. And here's a spoiler for you, it's probably not the one you think it is.
So here's the absolute crux of the issue. Today, your traditional contribution saves you money at your marginal tax rate. That's the rate on your very last dollar earned. It's the highest tax rate you pay. But, and this is the key, in retirement, you withdraw that money and pay taxes at your effective tax rate, which is basically an average across all the different tax brackets. Because of things like the standard deduction and our progressive system, your effective rate in retirement is almost guaranteed to be lower. That gap, that difference between the high rate today and the lower rate in retirement, that is everything. That's the whole ballgame.
And you know what? It gets even messier. Your retirement income isn't just subject to one simple tax bracket. Oh no. Taking money out can trigger all sorts of what you might call shadow taxes. Things like losing your healthcare subsidies, or triggering the dreaded Social Security tax torpedo, or getting hit with higher Medicare premiums. When you go all in on Roth, you're only solving for one variable, but the real retirement tax equation has, a whole lot more going on. So, to slice through all this complexity, researchers at algorithmicfire.com did something amazing. They ran a massive simulation covering thousands of different scenarios. We're talking different incomes, different savings rates, different retirement ages. So let's stop guessing and just look at what the hard data actually says. Now, the main thing we're going to be looking at is a metric called efficiency loss. Think of it as a penalty. It's the percentage of your spending money you just lose forever for your entire retirement, all because you picked one strategy over the mathematically perfect one. So a score of -5% means you're stuck with 5% less cash to spend year after year. All right, first up to bat, the all-traditional strategy. Now take a look at these charts. See that horizontal line at the very top of each box? That's 0. That's a perfect score. Now look at all the colored lines for the different savings rates. See how they're all crammed right up against that 0 line? This is telling us that going 100% traditional is incredibly efficient. The penalty is tiny.
Okay, so that's a pretty fantastic showing for the traditional account. But what happens when we put the Roth-only strategy through the exact same test? How does it stack up? And wow, here is the result for going all in on Roth. The difference is it's stark. Look at how far those lines plunge below the 0 penalty line. That efficiency loss is way bigger, pretty much across the board. And pay special attention to those red lines. That's a lower 5% savings rate. They consistently get hit with the biggest penalty. Let's just put them side by side to make it crystal clear. This is the data for a household earning $150,000 a year. On the left, you've got traditional, practically hugging that perfect score. And on the right, you've got Roth, with those massive nosedives into negative territory. I mean, the performance gap is just staring you right in the face. The visual evidence here is pretty undeniable.
Okay, let's make this really concrete. For that household making $150K, saving just 5% a year and retiring at 65, the Roth penalty is a staggering 7.7%. That means you have 7.7% less money to spend. That's over $8,700 of lost spending power every single year in retirement. Over 30 years, you guys, that adds up to more than $250,000. Just gone.
So why is this Roth penalty so big? It all comes back to that very first thing we talked about. You're making a choice to prepay your taxes at your high marginal rate today. Let's say that's 22 or 24%. but you could have deferred and then paid those taxes at a much, much lower effective rate of, say, 15% or even less in retirement. You're paying a premium you just don't need to pay. Okay, so it's pretty clear the old rule of thumb is broken. The data is screaming that there's a much better way to think about this. So let's introduce a new, smarter framework. Let's talk about the tax hurdle rule.
This is your new go-to rule. The tax hurdle rate is the tipping point. It's simple. If your current marginal tax rate is above this number, the math says you go traditional. If your rate is below it, you choose Roth. That's it. And pay really close attention to any number that's a zero. If your hurdle rate is 0, it means traditional is always the winner, no matter what your tax bracket is.
And here it is. This is the map. This beautiful chart gives you the answer for almost every scenario you can imagine. See all that light yellow and pale green? Those boxes are hurdle rates of 0% or 12%. What that tells us is that for a huge number of people, if your marginal tax bracket is 12% or higher, the data says traditional is the right play. And it's super easy to use. First, find the big box for your household income. Then find the column for when you think you'll retire. And finally, find the row for how much you save each year. Boom, the number in that little box where they all meet, that's your personal hurdle rate. Now you can actually make a decision based on data instead of just guessing. So what does this actually look like in the real world over the course of a career? Let's take a look at how an optimal strategy actually gets built year after year.
Let's look at this chart for that same $150,000 income family. Remember their hurdle rate? It was 0. And that means traditional wins every single year, no contest. And that's exactly what you see here, this solid wall of blue bars representing traditional contributions. Their marginal tax rate never drops below that 0% hurdle, which means there's literally never a time where it makes mathematical sense to pay those taxes upfront with a Roth.
Okay, let's wrap this all up and boil it down to the key takeaways. Number 1, for most people, most of the time, traditional should be your default choice. Number 2, the Roth penalty is a real thing, and it can easily cost you 5 to 10% of your retirement income. Number 3, that old advice about tax brackets, it's not just flawed, it's often completely backwards because it misses that crucial marginal versus effective rate distinction. And finally, number 4, the best strategy is often a hybrid, but it should almost always be a traditional first approach.
And if there's just one stat you remember from this entire analysis, please make it this one. In nearly half, 46% of all the thousands of scenarios they modeled, the best tax hurdle rate was 0. What does that mean? It means traditional just wins. Unconditionally, no ifs, ands, or buts. The data is clear.
So there you have it. A new framework, a new rule of thumb, and it's all backed by a mountain of data. The old conventional wisdom has been put to the test, and it failed. So the only question left for you is, now that you've seen the numbers, is it time to take a fresh look at your own retirement strategy?